Welcome back to Swift Tale, the channel where real stories meet powerful truths. If you're visiting for the first time, take a second to hit that like, share, and subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will challenge what you think you know about justice, race, and power. Let me ask you this. What would you do if you saw someone being treated unfairly right in front of you? Would you stay quiet, or would you step in? Today's story isn't just about a teenager being wrongfully accused. It's about what happened after. The boy, a 17-year-old named Marcus, had simply come to the mall to buy a birthday gift for his little sister. He wasn't loud, wasn't causing trouble, and certainly wasn't stealing. But one misunderstanding, one biased assumption, and one overreaction turned a simple shopping trip into a national controversy. As the officers dragged him across the shiny mall floor, cell phones recorded every second. Within minutes, the footage went viral online. Outrage spread like wildfire, but what happened next left everyone speechless. Just as the officers tightened their grip on Marcus, a group of men in suits stormed through the mall entrance. They weren't security guards, they were FBI agents. Within seconds, the two officers who had been shouting and dragging Marcus were the ones being surrounded. Shoppers gasped as badges flashed and commands were shouted. The power dynamic flipped in an instant, and the truth began to unfold. This story matters because it isn't just about one boy's pain or two officers' mistake. It's about what happens when people abuse authority, when assumptions replace facts, and when a nation's conscience is tested right before its eyes. It's about how truth can rise even in chaos, and how justice sometimes shows up when we least expect it. So stay tuned, because in the story you're about to hear, every detail leads to a powerful revelation, one that proves even the smallest voice can ignite a storm for change. Before the chaos, before the cameras, before the flashing FBI badges, it was just another ordinary morning for Marcus Reed, a 17-year-old high school senior from Atlanta. He wasn't thinking about justice or viral videos. He was thinking about his little sister, Kayla, who was turning 10 that afternoon. The two of them were inseparable. She looked up to him like a hero, and he promised he'd get her the perfect birthday gift, a charm bracelet she'd been wanting for months. Marcus woke up early that Saturday, the soft hum of his mother's gospel music drifting through the thin walls of their small apartment. His mom, Tanya Reed, had been up since dawn, already dressed for her second shift at the nursing home. Money was tight, but love was plenty. She kissed Marcus on the forehead before heading out, reminding him with a tired smile, "Don't forget the cake, baby, and make sure you get back before dinner." He promised her he would. The day was bright, the sun spilling gold across the cracked sidewalks as Marcus walked toward the bus stop. He had exactly $40, money he'd saved from doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, and he intended to make every dollar count. On the ride to the mall, he stared out the window, lost in thought. He imagined Kayla's smile when she saw the bracelet, the way she'd probably jump up and hug him tight. That thought alone made the long bus ride worth it. When he stepped into the mall, the world seemed perfect for a moment. Kids ran past him with ice cream, holiday music floated through the air, and stores sparkled with lights and decorations. He took his time browsing, finally spotting the little silver bracelet in a jewelry shop window. It was delicate, simple, and exactly what she'd dreamed of. As he reached for his wallet, he didn't notice the eyes watching him from across the store, two mall cops who had been standing near the entrance, whispering to each other. Marcus walked toward the register, still smiling, when one of the officers began moving closer. The store clerk handed him a bag, and just as Marcus turned to leave, the cop's voice cut through the air. "Hey, stop right there." The tone was sharp, accusatory. Shoppers turned to look. Marcus froze, confused. "Sir," he asked, "what's going on?" The officer stepped closer, pointing. "Empty your pockets. We got a report you took something off the shelf." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "What? No, sir, I just paid for this." He gestured to the receipt in his hand, but it didn't matter. In that instant, he wasn't seen as a teenager or a big brother. He was seen as a suspect. This was the moment everything started to unravel. A misunderstanding born from assumption, fueled by bias, and soon to spiral out of control. But what Marcus didn't know was that someone else in that mall had already seen everything, and they weren't going to stay silent. The officer's tone hardened as he stepped closer to Marcus, his hand already hovering over his holster. "I said empty your pockets," he barked, his voice echoing across the store. Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sir, please," he stammered, holding out the small shopping bag and receipt. "You can check the cameras. I didn't steal anything." His voice trembled, not from guilt, but from the creeping fear that no one was going to believe him. The second officer, taller and built like a linebacker, circled behind Marcus. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. People started gathering near the entrance of the store, whispering, pulling out their phones. A woman with a stroller gasped. A man muttered under his breath, "Not again." Marcus could feel the heat rising to his face as shame and fear collided inside him. He had done nothing wrong, but he was already being treated like a criminal. The clerk, a young woman who had just sold him the bracelet, tried to speak up. "Officer, he paid," she said quickly, pointing toward the register. "I rang him up. You can check the system." But before she could say more, one of the officers cut her off sharply. "Ma'am, please step back. We'll handle this." She hesitated, biting her lip, then looked at Marcus with eyes full of silent apology. Marcus's hands trembled as he raised them. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm not resisting. I didn't do anything." But his words only seemed to provoke them further. The taller officer grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. Marcus winced, gasping in pain. The crowd's murmurs grew louder now. "Hey, that's too much," someone shouted. Another voice, "He's just a kid." But the officers didn't stop. They dragged Marcus out of the store and into the open mall walkway, the boy's sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as he tried to keep his balance. The scene was chaos. Phones were up everywhere, recording from every angle. A woman yelled, "He showed you the receipt," while another cried, "This is harassment." But to the officers, none of that mattered. They had decided the story already. In their eyes, Marcus wasn't a student, a brother, or an innocent kid. He was a suspect, and in that moment, that label was all it took. Marcus's bag slipped from his hand as one of the officers shoved him to the floor. His cheek pressed against the cold tile. He felt the sting of humiliation more than the pain. His mind screamed for his mother, for Kayla, for anyone to make it stop. "Please," he whispered again, his voice barely audible. "I didn't do anything." The taller officer leaned down close to his ear, his voice low and full of disdain. "Should have thought about that before stealing," he sneered. The words hit Marcus harder than the shove itself. Just then, the sound of shouting echoed from the far end of the mall, but this time, it wasn't coming from the crowd. It was firm, authoritative, and commanding. "Federal agents, step away from the boy." The two officers froze, confusion flashing across their faces. Marcus lifted his head slightly, dazed, as 10 men in suits appeared, moving with precision and purpose. Shoppers gasped and scattered, clearing a path. The lead agent raised his badge, his voice ringing out, "FBI, you're both under investigation. Release him now." The officers looked stunned, unsure if it was some kind of mistake. But it was. Within seconds, their own hands were being pulled behind their backs, metal cuffs clicking shut. The crowd erupted, cheers, disbelief, applause. Marcus lay on the floor, breathing hard, still trying to understand what had just happened. In one moment, he'd gone from being treated like a criminal to being protected by the highest law enforcement agency in the country. But what he didn't know yet, what no one knew, was that this wasn't a coincidence. The FBI had been watching those two officers for weeks, and Marcus had just become the turning point in an investigation that would expose far more than anyone expected. The moment the handcuffs clicked onto the two officers' wrists, the crowd erupted into a chaotic mix of gasps, cheers, and disbelief. Cameras flashed, phones streamed live, and a ripple of murmurs ran through the mall. Marcus sat up slowly, his body trembling, his eyes darting between the agents and the officers who had been dragging him just seconds earlier. His mind spun. What was happening? Why were the FBI there? And why did they seem to know exactly who to arrest? As one of the agents, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a calm authority, knelt beside Marcus, she spoke gently. "You're safe now, son. We saw everything." Her voice carried the kind of weight that came from both compassion and command. Marcus blinked, confused. You saw everything?" he asked. She nodded. "We've been watching these two for months." The lead agent, Special Agent Daniel Harris, stepped forward, addressing the stunned crowd. "Everyone, please clear the area," he ordered. "We'll handle this from here." His voice was steady, professional, but beneath it, there was something else. Relief. As mall security scrambled to cooperate, Marcus was helped to his feet. His knees were scraped, his palms red and trembling. The female agent, Agent Maria Torres, handed him a small bottle of water. "You did nothing wrong," she said quietly, "and what you just went through is exactly why we are here." Later that afternoon, away from the noise and flashing lights, Marcus sat in a small interview room at the FBI field office downtown. His mother, Tanya, sat beside him, holding his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Across the table sat Agent Harris and Agent Torres. On the table between them was a manila folder filled with photos, reports, and surveillance images, all of them showing the same two male officers. Harris leaned forward, his voice measured. "Marcus, what happened to you today wasn't random. These two officers, Miller and Grant, have been under federal investigation for civil rights violations, abuse of power, and falsifying reports." Tanya's eyes widened, and Marcus stared, stunned. "You mean they've done this before?" Agent Torres nodded. "Many times," she said grimly. "They've targeted young black men across several miles in this area. False accusations, illegal searches, excessive force, all swept under the rug by their department. But today they went too far, and thanks to you, we caught them red-handed." Marcus swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. Hours earlier, he'd been lying on the mall floor, humiliated and afraid. Now he was being told that his nightmare had exposed something much bigger, something systemic. Harris continued, "We had a sting operation in place for weeks. We knew they were going to act out again, we just didn't know when. Our team was undercover in that mall today, monitoring their movements. When they went after you, we saw everything unfold in real time. It was the final piece of evidence we needed to bring them in." Tanya's voice trembled as she spoke. "So my son, my baby, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Torres shook her head. "Maybe the right place," she said softly. "It's because of him that we can finally stop this." Marcus sat silently, his thoughts racing. He'd always been taught to respect authority, to trust that the badge meant safety, but today had shattered that illusion. And yet, somehow, justice had shown up when it mattered most. As the agents wrapped up the interview, Harris looked Marcus in the eye. "You showed a lot of strength back there," he said. "Most people would have fought or panicked, but you stayed calm. You helped us close this case, whether you meant to or not." Marcus nodded, though his mind was still spinning. I didn't want to make it worse," he admitted. Torres smiled faintly. "You didn't make it worse, Marcus. You made it right." Outside the FBI building, reporters were already gathering. The story had exploded online. Clips of the arrest were being shared across social media, tagged with words like "Justice at the Mall" and "Marcus Reed." Millions had already seen the footage of the FBI stepping in, and the world wanted answers. But this was just the beginning, because as the investigation dug deeper, the truth about those officers and the system that had protected them was about to be exposed in ways no one was prepared for. By the next morning, Marcus's face was everywhere, on TV screens, in online headlines, across social media feeds. The video from the mall had gone viral overnight, racking up millions of views and igniting outrage across the country. The footage was raw and emotional, two officers dragging a terrified teenager across the mall floor, the crowd shouting for them to stop, and then, in a stunning twist, the FBI storming in to arrest the cops. News anchors replayed it again and again, calling it one of the most shocking moments of the year. For Marcus and his family, it didn't feel like fame, it felt like exposure. He sat at the kitchen table the next morning, staring at the TV, his cereal untouched. His mother, Tanya, stood beside him, her phone buzzing non-stop. Reporters wanted interviews, activists wanted statements. Strangers sent messages of love and hate. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. Marcus just shook his head. "I didn't ask for any of this, Ma. I just wanted to get Kayla her gift." His little sister, Kayla, peeked out from the hallway, clutching her new bracelet, the one that had started it all. "You're famous now," she whispered with a shy smile. Marcus tried to smile back, but it didn't reach his eyes. Fame wasn't what he felt. What he felt was confusion, anger, and exhaustion. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the officers shouting, felt the cold floor beneath his cheek, saw the red recording lights of the phones pointed at him. Outside, news vans lined the street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. The story had taken on a life of its own. Talk shows debated it, pundits argued, and hashtags trended. Some people hailed Marcus as a symbol of resilience, proof of why reform was needed. Others twisted the narrative, trying to justify the officer's actions. The country was divided again, the air thick with tension. At midday, the FBI held a press conference. Special Agent Daniel Harris stood at the podium, flanked by Agent Torres and local law enforcement officials. Yesterday's events at the Westfield Mall were part of an ongoing investigation into officers Miller and Grant, he said. We can confirm that these individuals have been charged with multiple counts of civil rights violations, assault, and falsifying police reports. The young man involved, Marcus Reed, is a victim, not a suspect. Those words should have brought relief, but for Marcus, the weight of it all only deepened. His name was now tied to something much bigger than him. He had become a symbol, a face for justice, but also a target for anger. As the day went on, social media filled with both praise and hate. Some people called him brave, others accused him of setting up the cops. Anonymous accounts sent threats. Tanya turned off her phone when the messages became too much. That evening there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the media this time. It was Agent Torres holding a small folder. "Can we talk?" she asked gently. Inside, she explained that the investigation was expanding. Miller and Grant weren't acting alone. Other officers in nearby precincts were being questioned, and the FBI had discovered doctored reports going back years. "This is going to get bigger before it gets better," she warned. "You and your family might want to lay low for a while." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't want any more attention, but deep down, something was stirring in him, a sense of responsibility, maybe even purpose. "If my story helps stop this from happening to someone else," he said quietly, "then maybe it's worth it." Torres looked at him with a faint smile. "That's a brave thing to say, Marcus, but remember, change isn't easy. It comes with a cost." As night fell, Marcus stood by the window, watching the news vans pack up. Across the screen, his name scrolled beneath footage of protests erupting downtown. People were marching with signs that read "Justice for Marcus" and "End Abuse of Power." His story had sparked something real, something bigger than the Mall, bigger than his fear. But what Marcus didn't know was that for every person marching in his name, there were others plotting to silence him. And soon, the cost of standing for truth would become painfully clear. For a few days, the world celebrated Marcus Reed as a hero. Social media overflowed with support, donations poured in from across the country, and reporters described him as the brave teen who stood for truth. But as the news cycle shifted, the tone began to change. Trolls flooded his posts with hateful comments. Anonymous messages filled his inbox, threats, slurs, and warnings to keep his mouth shut. Some said he had ruined two good officers' lives. Others claimed he was lying. Marcus stopped going online altogether. His mother, Tanya, tried to protect him, but she couldn't shield him from the fear that began to creep into their everyday lives. One evening, she came home from work to find a brick smashed through their front window. Taped to it was a note that read, "Stay quiet or you'll regret it." She trembled as she called Agent Torres, who arrived with a team of agents within the hour. Torres' voice was calm, but her face was tense. "We'll keep an eye on you," she promised. "But Marcus, you need to understand, when people in power get exposed, they don't go down quietly." That night, as the family huddled together, Marcus realized that this wasn't just about two officers anymore. It was about a system, and that system was fighting back. The next morning, Marcus's school felt different. Kids whispered in the hallways, some offering sympathy, others keeping their distance. His best friend, Jordan, avoided eye contact. When Marcus caught up with him after class, Jordan's words hit hard. "Man, my uncle works for the city," he said quietly. "He told me to stay away from you, says this whole thing is bad news." Marcus stared at him, disbelief written across his face. "Bad news, Jordan, they dragged me across the floor." Jordan sighed. "I know, bro, but people are saying the FBI set them up, that you're part of it." He shook his head. "I don't believe it, but that's what's going around." It felt like a punch to the gut. Marcus had already endured humiliation, fear, and threats. Now even the people he trusted were turning on him. By the time he got home, his chest felt heavy with anger. "Why does telling the truth feel like a crime?" he muttered under his breath. That evening, Agent Harris visited their apartment again. He wasn't smiling this time. "We've been monitoring chatter from certain police circles," he explained. "There's talk about retaliation, not just online. We're moving you and your family to a safe location until the trial." Tanya's hand flew to her chest. "A safe location, like witness protection?" Harris nodded. "Temporarily, yes. Until this blows over, we can't take chances." The idea of leaving their home, the only one they'd ever known, terrified them. But Marcus saw the fear in his mother's eyes and made the decision for both of them. "We'll go," he said quietly. 2 days later, under the cover of night, they were moved to a small rented house in a quiet suburb 3 towns over. No reporters, no cameras, no neighbors who recognized them, just silence. But even in safety, peace didn't come easily. Marcus would wake in the middle of the night, his heart racing, hearing echoes of that day, the shouting, the dragging, the humiliation. One evening, as he sat on the porch staring into the dark, Agent Torres pulled up in an unmarked car. She sat beside him without saying a word for a long while. Finally, she spoke. "You know, Marcus, not everyone gets to see the truth up close. Most people go their whole lives pretending injustice isn't real. But you've seen it, and that's a heavy thing to carry." Marcus looked at her, his voice low. "It doesn't feel like I'm carrying truth. It feels like I'm carrying a curse." Torres gave a sad smile. "Truth feels like that at first, but someday it'll feel like power." She stood to leave, but before she got back into her car, she added one last thing. "Stay strong. The next few weeks will be hard, but the world's watching now. Don't let fear make you quiet." After she left, Marcus sat alone under the faint glow of the porch light. He thought about everything he'd lost, his peace, his privacy, his friends, and everything he'd unwillingly become, a symbol. But deep inside, a quiet fire began to grow. Maybe Torres was right. Maybe truth was power. And soon, that power was going to shake the very people who had tried to silence him. Weeks passed in the safe house, each day quieter than the last. Marcus spent most of his time staring out the window, watching strangers live their lives, walking dogs, carrying groceries, laughing freely, while he and his mother lived like ghosts. The silence gave him too much time to think. Too much time to relive the moment he was dragged across the mall floor, the look of disgust on the officer's face, and the flash of fear in his mother's eyes when the FBI surrounded them. One morning, Agent Torres arrived with a folder under her arm and a look of cautious excitement. "Marcus," she said, "the Department of Justice is opening a full investigation into the Mal police unit. They've requested your official testimony." Marcus's heart pounded. "You mean they're actually listening?" Torres nodded. "Yes, but it's not just them. People are talking about what happened to you, activists, journalists, even lawmakers. The story is gaining traction nationwide. They want to hear your voice, not just the footage." At first, Marcus hesitated. The idea of speaking publicly terrified him. What if they twisted his words? What if the threats got worse? But something deep inside reminded him of what Torres had said before. Truth feels like a curse at first, but someday it'll feel like power. That night he sat at the small kitchen table, notebook open, trying to find the right words. His mother watched him from across the room. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "You've been through enough." Marcus looked up, his eyes steady. "If I don't do this, Mom, it'll just happen to someone else, maybe worse." 2 days later, Marcus appeared, virtually, on a nationally broadcast interview. The interviewer introduced him as the teen whose courage exposed a shocking abuse of power. But when the camera light turned on, Marcus didn't think about the FBI, or the reporters, or the people watching from their couches. He thought about every kid who had ever been told to stay quiet, every mother who had ever begged for justice, and every person who had been treated as less than human because of the color of their skin. "My name is Marcus Reed," he began, voice steady but full of emotion. "And I never thought standing up for myself would make me a target. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to be treated like a person." He spoke about the fear, the pain, the humiliation, and the strength it took to keep going. His words weren't rehearsed. They came from the rawest place in his heart, and that authenticity struck a chord across the nation. Within hours, the clip spread like wildfire. Hashtags flooded social media: justice for Marcus, stand with truth, end abuse of power. People from all backgrounds began to share their own stories of racial profiling, police intimidation, and systemic neglect. What began as one boy's story became a spark, and that spark lit a fire of unity and outrage. Protesters gathered outside the very mall where it had all begun. Thousands marched with signs bearing Marcus's name and face. Justice for all, not for some, they chanted. News stations ran live coverage. Influential figures, athletes, actors, even politicians spoke out. For the first time, Marcus realized the magnitude of what he had started. But with the growing support came a wave of resistance. Critics called him a liar, claiming the video had been edited or taken out of context. Certain media outlets twisted the narrative, painting him as a troublemaker who was stirring division. When Marcus saw the headlines, he felt that familiar knot of anger tighten in his chest. "They still don't get it," he said. "They think this is about me." Tors, sitting across from him, leaned forward. "Then make them understand it's not. Speak again, not as a victim, but as a voice for change." So he did. Marcus began giving interviews, attending rallies under FBI supervision, and speaking directly to young people. His words grew stronger with each appearance. "They tried to silence me with fear, but silence only helps the people who do wrong. Speaking out, that's how we take back power." Soon, Marcus was invited to deliver a speech at a major community event in Washington, D.C. It was his biggest stage yet, and as he looked out at the crowd, thousands of faces stared back at him, waiting. His mother stood off to the side, tears in her eyes, pride radiating through her like sunlight. "Today," Marcus began, "I stand not as a victim, but as proof that the truth can't be buried. What happened to me was wrong, but what we do next, that's what will define us." When he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Tors, standing at the edge of the stage, whispered to a fellow agent, "This kid just changed everything." That night, as Marcus lay in bed back at the safe house, he scrolled through messages from strangers, teachers, soldiers, single mothers, even former police officers, all thanking him for his courage. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not because the battle was over, but because he had finally found his purpose. He wasn't just the boy who was dragged across a mall floor anymore. He was the young man who had turned pain into power and silence into a movement. As Marcus's story spread across the nation, the FBI intensified their investigation. What had started as a single case of police brutality at a shopping mall was quickly unraveling into something much larger and far more sinister. Agent Tors knew it from the beginning. The aggression of those officers wasn't random. It was systemic. The more she dug, the more she realized that the attack on Marcus was the surface of a deep-rooted network of corruption, cover-ups, and money trails hidden in plain sight. It started with a series of internal memos, documents Tors obtained through a whistleblower inside the department. The memos revealed an unofficial directive encouraging aggressive enforcement tactics against high-risk demographics, which was nothing more than coded language for racial profiling. But that was only the beginning. Financial records showed that the mall security contract, the one under which those officers operated, was owned by a shell company linked to a powerful local businessman with deep political ties. That businessman, Richard Calloway, the same billionaire whose companies funded multiple law enforcement training initiatives across the state. To the public, he was a philanthropist and civic leader. Behind closed doors, he was paying officers bonuses for maintaining control of certain neighborhoods and public spaces. Marcus's assault wasn't just an act of racism. It was part of a larger operation to control image, power, and influence in the city. Tors sat in her office late one night, staring at the evidence board covered in photographs, documents, and string lines connecting names. Agent Harris entered quietly, coffee in hand. "You've been at this for 18 hours straight," he said. She didn't look up. "If this goes public, it'll rock the entire department, maybe even the mayor's office." Harris set the cup down. "Then we need to make sure it's airtight. No leaks, no politics, just truth." Meanwhile, Marcus and his mother were trying to live some version of normal. Every morning, Tanya would make breakfast while watching the news, and every morning, Marcus would see his face on the screen, his speech, his interviews, his story. The world had turned his pain into a movement, but he still had questions. Why did it happen in the first place? Who ordered those officers to act that way? When Tors visited him again, Marcus asked directly, "You're not telling me everything, are you?" Tors hesitated. "There are things I can't say yet, but Marcus, this is bigger than you think. What you went through, it wasn't just an accident. Someone benefited from keeping people like you afraid." Marcus's jaw tightened. "So what happens now?" Tors met his gaze. "Now we expose them." Within weeks, the FBI quietly built a case against Calloway and his partners. Subpoenas went out. Hidden files were seized. Emails surfaced showing payments to specific officers, including the very ones who had attacked Marcus. The evidence was overwhelming: kickbacks, racial targeting orders, falsified reports, and hush money. When the FBI finally made their move, it was a storm. Calloway was arrested during a gala fundraiser, cameras flashing as he was led out in handcuffs. The same city officials who once praised him now turned away in silence. The two officers from Marcus's case, who had already been suspended, were charged with assault and civil rights violations, but now they were also linked to Calloway's corruption ring. News outlets exploded with headlines. "Billionaire linked to police corruption scandal arrested." FBI uncovers network of racial profiling operations. Teen's courage sparks federal investigation. Marcus watched the reports in stunned silence. His mother wept quietly beside him, relief and disbelief mixing together. "Baby," she whispered, "you did this. You made them listen." But Marcus shook his head. "No, Mom, we did this. Everyone who spoke up, everyone who refused to stay quiet, this belongs to all of us." That night, Tors visited once again, this time smiling for the first time in months. "It's over," she said softly. "At least the worst of it. The truth is out." Marcus looked out the window into the dark sky, the weight of everything slowly lifting from his shoulders. "It's not over," he said. "It's just starting. People will remember what happened, and they'll start asking questions in other cities, other towns." Tors nodded. "Good, that's how change begins." A few days later, Marcus was invited back to his city to attend a press conference led by the Justice Department. They wanted to honor him not as a victim, but as a voice for justice. Standing at the podium, surrounded by flashing cameras and microphones, Marcus took a deep breath. "I never wanted fame," he said. "I just wanted fairness. What happened to me was wrong, but it showed us something even more important, that silence allows corruption to grow. We can't fix what we don't face, so let's face it together." Applause filled the room. Tors and Harris exchanged a proud glance, knowing that the young man in front of them had done more to shake the system than they ever could have imagined. That night, as Marcus walked through the city that once made him afraid, he saw something new: people of all backgrounds walking together, holding signs that read "Truth Wins." For the first time, the city didn't feel hostile. It felt hopeful. And though the battle for justice wasn't over, Marcus knew this: one act of courage, one voice raised in truth, could change everything. Months passed since the FBI brought down the corrupt network that had once thrived in silence. The city was no longer the same, neither was Marcus Reed. What began as an act of survival had evolved into a national movement for justice and accountability. Across the country, people were demanding reform. Local news stations began highlighting similar cases, and more victims came forward, emboldened by Marcus's courage. Marcus's life, however, was far from ordinary. The fame, the interviews, the constant attention, it all felt surreal. At 17, he was invited to speak at schools, universities, and even a youth summit in Washington, D.C., but no matter how big the stage got, he never forgot where it started: the mall floor where his voice was almost silenced. One morning, Marcus woke up to find a letter slipped under the door of their new home. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a single line: "You turned pain into purpose. Thank you for giving my son hope." There was no name, no address, just a mother's gratitude. Marcus held the note for a long time, realizing that what he'd done went beyond exposing corruption. He had given people belief that one person's truth could ripple across an entire nation. Meanwhile, the Justice Department implemented a sweeping reform policy inspired by the investigation. It included new training protocols, mandatory body cameras for all MAL and city officers, and stricter oversight for private security contracts. The media called it the Reed Act. When Marcus heard that, he laughed softly in disbelief. "I didn't ask for any of this," he told Tors during a visit. She smiled. "That's what makes it real, Marcus. The best change usually comes from those who never asked to lead, only to be heard." Despite the progress, the journey wasn't without scars. Marcus still had nightmares. Sometimes he'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, hearing echoes of that day, the rough hands, the shouting, the fear. His therapist reminded him that healing wasn't about forgetting, but learning to live with the memory without letting it control him. And slowly, he began to do just that. One afternoon, he and his mother returned to the mall, not to shop, but to face the place that had changed their lives forever. It had been renovated, brighter lights, new management, new faces. But to Marcus, every corner held a shadow of the past. As he stood in the very spot where he'd been dragged, a security guard approached cautiously. "You're Marcus Reed, aren't you?" the guard asked. "I just wanted to say what you did took guts. Because of you, every one of us gets better training now. Things are changing, man." Marcus nodded, his voice quiet. "Thank you, just make sure no one else has to go through what I did." He walked away with a sense of closure he hadn't known he needed. For the first time, the mall didn't feel like a place of fear. It felt like proof of survival. A few weeks later, Marcus was awarded the National Youth Medal for Courage and Integrity at a ceremony in D.C. Cameras flashed. Reporters called his name, but Marcus stayed humble. When it was his turn to speak, he looked out at the crowd and said, "I'm not special. I'm just someone who didn't stay quiet. There are thousands of people out there, people who have been silenced, ignored, or hurt, and all they need is for someone to listen. So if my story means anything, let it mean this: never let fear keep you from standing up." His words earned a standing ovation. Even seasoned politicians wiped their eyes. Among the audience, Agent Tors and Agent Harris stood with quiet pride, exchanging a knowing glance. They had seen this boy's journey from the moment he was broken, and now he was whole again, standing tall under the world's gaze. In the weeks that followed, Marcus started working with a non-profit organization that supported victims of police misconduct. He became a mentor to other teens who had faced similar trauma, helping them turn their pain into purpose just like he had. "You don't have to be famous to make change," he told them. "You just have to speak the truth." At home, life began to settle into something like normalcy. Tanya started smiling again, her laughter filling the house. She told her son, "You gave me my faith back, not just in justice, but in people." On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Marcus sat on the porch, sunlight warming his face. He opened his old notebook, the one where he'd written his first speech, and began to write again. Only this time, the words weren't about pain or injustice. They were about hope, about how even in the darkest moments, light can still break through. As he finished writing, a gentle breeze lifted the pages, and Marcus smiled to himself. The world was far from perfect, but it was changing, and he had been part of that change. Not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he refused to stay silent. In that moment, he understood something powerful. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do isn't to fight, it's to forgive, to heal, and to keep believing that better days are possible. And for Marcus Reed, those better days had finally begun. As the story of Marcus Reed reached its final chapter, it was no longer just about one boy, one mal, or one injustice. It had become a living testimony of courage, compassion, and the power of speaking truth even when the world tries to silence you. Across the country, schools taught his story, community programs were inspired by his movement, and documentaries began production to share how one moment of pain turned into a turning point for justice. Marcus often said he didn't see himself as a hero. "I was just tired of being afraid," he'd tell interviewers. But to millions who saw their own struggles reflected in his, he was a beacon of hope. His name had become synonymous with resilience, proof that even when the odds seem impossible, standing up can shake mountains. 1 year after the incident, a memorial event was held at the city's central plaza, now renamed Reed Square in honor of his courage. The event wasn't about fame or politics, it was about community. There were families of victims, police officers who vowed to do better, and activists standing side by side. Children held candles that flickered softly against the evening sky as a choir sang, "Rise Again." Marcus stood before the crowd, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. His mother, Tanya, watched proudly from the front row. Agent Tors stood behind him, arms folded, her expression both proud and emotional. When Marcus began to speak, his voice carried the calm strength of someone who had lived through darkness and come out on the other side. "Last year," he said, "I was dragged across a mall floor, humiliated, scared, and broken. I thought that moment defined me, but I learned something powerful. It's not what happens to us that defines who we are, it's how we rise afterward. I found my voice when I thought I'd lost everything, and I want every person listening to know your voice matters too." The crowd fell silent, every word sinking deep. He continued, "There will always be people who try to silence the truth, who use fear and hate to control others, but they only win if we let them. Speak up, stand firm, help someone who can't fight for themselves, because when one person stands for what's right, it gives others permission to do the same, and that's how change begins." The plaza erupted in applause, but Marcus didn't see fame in that moment. What he saw were faces, young, old, black, white, every background united by something far greater than pain, hope. After the event, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Tors approached him quietly. "You know," she said, smiling, "I think you've done more for this city than any of us ever could." Marcus grinned. "I just told my truth." She nodded, and that's exactly what the world needed. Later that evening, Marcus walked through the city streets alone, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting in his eyes. The once broken boy was now a young man with a mission to make sure no one else had to experience what he did. He promised himself that his story wouldn't end with him. It would continue through every person he inspired to speak up, to care, to act. As he stood at the corner of the rebuilt mall, he whispered softly to himself, "It's not about revenge, it's about change." Then he looked directly into the camera. A small production crew from his YouTube partner channel, Swift Tale, was recording the closing monologue for the video version of his story. With the same calm voice that had captured the nation's heart, Marcus spoke to the viewers. "If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, not just to my story, but to what it stands for. Life will test you, people will doubt you, and sometimes the truth will cost you everything. But I promise it's worth it, because silence helps the oppressor and your voice can change the world." He leaned forward slightly, sincerity radiating through his tone. So if this story moved you even a little, do something about it. Speak up for someone who's hurting, stand up when it's uncomfortable, and most of all, don't let fear make you small. Then, as the camera slowly zoomed out, Marcus offered a heartfelt smile. This is Swift Tale, and if you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments, what does courage mean to you? Because your voice matters, and together, our voices can rewrite the story. The screen faded to black, the soft notes of an emotional piano track playing under his final words. White text appeared, dedicated to every voice that refused to be silenced. Inspired by true events. As the outro music swelled, the comments began flooding in, thousands of people from around the world sharing their own experiences, stories of injustice, recovery, forgiveness, and strength. It wasn't just a YouTube video anymore. It was a global conversation, one that Marcus had started with a moment of courage. And that now belonged to everyone who dared to believe that one person can make a difference. And that's how one voice, one truth changed everything.